Howdy, folks. It is Wednesday night Bible study, and we are continuing on in our study of Romans chapter 13. We're going to finish that chapter this evening, I promise we will. It seems like we move ahead a little faster this way, but I enjoy doing it this way, but I'll sure like to get back with you all, seeing your face, hearing your laughter, posing your questions, trying to answer them. It's good times, good times. Appreciate many of you that are staying with the Wednesday night Bible study. It's great that you're doing that. Some of you that are new to this, we've been doing this for a long time on Wednesday night Bible study. I usually take a book of the Bible and go into great detail with it. We've been doing Romans for a year and a half or thereabouts. And we are getting close to finishing it. Shouldn't be but a few more months, and we will do that. But let's get into Romans 13. If you have not looked at Romans 13 from the beginning, we will not look at it from the beginning, but you can go back to last week and look at it. You can go on my YouTube channel, search Larry Floyd, and I believe I have my Wednesday nights up there that I have recorded, and I will continue to do this as long as we need to do this. We might even figure out a way to do this on Wednesday nights and post them. I don't know. We'll find out. But go back and look at it, because this is one of those interesting places where Paul stops and says, what is our relationship to ourselves, to God, to our church, to our enemies, and to our government? And Paul is trying to cover all the bases here, and he does a pretty thorough job. And we'll continue doing this. We're going to look just at a verse, and then we'll jump into verses 8 through the end of the chapter, I believe is correct. Yeah, through the end of the chapter. But let's look at verse 4 one more time. Speaking of the government that Paul said is placed there by God, that God has a purpose in it. Remember, we talked about purpose of order, purpose of justice. It doesn't always work out that way, but look at verse 4. For it is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for nothing, for no reason. For it is God's servant, an avenger that brings wrath on ones who does wrong. So, there you go. What's our relationship? Well, two things. And I'm using some notes here. I've got beside me some things I've been studying, and this gets a little complicated, so I'm going to do this, going to use those notes, so follow along with me if you will. First of all, that there is a negative function of the government, and that is that the state is to punish wrongdoing. Did you get that? It's to punish wrongdoing. That the state doesn't carry the sword for a reason. So there's something here that he's trying to point out, that it is the state's responsibility to correct and inflict punishment for wrongdoers, and you shouldn't be one of those people. Now, we don't like that when we are caught, right? If you are in a speed trap, you don't like that. Man, when they pull you over, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, you get that taste in your mouth. I wasn't really doing all that much just because I was 15 miles over the speed limit. That's not a big deal. You seldom say that, but you often think that, and you really don't like that, right? But think about it. If the police were not there to stop the wrong that's being done, we would be in a state of chaos. And so our responsibility to the state is a negative one, but it's an important one. Murder, theft, other kinds of things, bank frauds. We have a sense of justice built into us. It's part of our spiritual DNA. And we like to see judgment come to those who do wrong, except when we do it, right? Then we got a reason. We got something we a purpose that, you should understand. But if we didn't have this, we would not be able to live in a society. However, we can go to a place, and we've been talking or looking into news items recently about, well, in order to keep you safe, we're going to have to give up a lot of rights. See, there's where it becomes an issue, right? How far do we go in trying to keep a good society, one that is free from all kinds of ills, even our physical ills? It's one of those things that are not an easy thing, and we have to continue to look at it as best we can in the place where we are. Don't be so quick to say, whatever's for my best, the state will declare that. That's not always good, because the state does not always have your best interests in right in the crosshairs. We have to be careful with that, but we also have to look at the other side. Is that when there are those times that the state says this is for your best interest, and we agree with it, and we look at it scripturally and ethically, and we try to figure that out, then we say, okay, that's what we're going to do. See, that's why this has such that both sides of it is that the negative side is to keep us from harm, but also for our good. And I would say, well, it's for our good that we do these things, and if we have a majority in rule, therefore we say that's for your good. And again, we have to be very careful. This is why, folks, our relationship to the state is very complex. And I want to bring that to your attention. Just because you're a Christian doesn't make you a Republican or a Democrat, okay? Period. Do not sell yourselves over to a political party lock, stock, and barrel. You're going to lean one way or the other, and I understand that, but you know what? I see enough things that are good that the state is doing that I want to say, do some more good, state. That makes me liberal. Or I say, look, the role of government is simply to punish evil and stay out of my life. Then I'm very conservative. How am I? I'm a conservative liberal. That's what it comes down to, because it's difficult for us to sell ourselves over, and don't do it. Because here, this is really important. The role of the church is to be able to look at the government and be critical of it, good and bad. And where it's difficult to do that if you go and you sleep in the bed of a political party. And I'm using some pretty strong language there, but I'm doing that purposely. Be careful, because it's hard for us to criticize or even support when it is our political party that is doing the working. You understand what I'm saying? Our connection with the government is one that we should never sell ourselves over to and say, that's who I am. Because at the end of the day, who I am is a follower of Christ. And how I behave should be because I am a follower of Christ, not because I am identified with any political persuasion. It's difficult, right? It is, and it should be, and it always will be, because even though God is in the midst of establishing people and places of power, it is our responsibility to not just simply jump on board, get in bed, but it is our responsibility to be the people of Christ. And when we see wrong, we need to be able to hold wrong to its own problems there, to its what we need to do with it, and how we need to settle that down. So it's difficult, guys. It's difficult. So I'm going to leave it at there. And let you struggle with that, because I do think it's a struggle. It really is. You are a Christian who has a responsibility in this world to make sure that others know the kind of life that Christ would want you to live. And I think that's where he finishes out in verse 8 to the end of the chapter. Now, this is a difficult, I've looked at a whole bunch of stuff today and trying to, okay, where does this fit in? Because it would be easy. In verse 8, he says, do not owe anyone anything except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments, do not steal. And we'll look at all those in a minute. So it almost looks like, remember, in chapter 12, Paul talks about a relationship with ourselves, with God, with the fellow believers, and with enemies. Then he goes to the government. And now, is he going back to everybody else? I think, yes, he could. And a number of interpreters who write great things say this, it's kind of, the government thing is kind of sandwiched in the how do we treat one another. And I could see that, and I think that's very possible. But I also think that because of the context of chapter 13, he's still talking about our relationship with those in government at large, those that are around us. So I don't think he's lost completely the sight of how we deal with the government, but also how we deal with others under our government, of the people, by the people, for the people. Who are we? Who are we, the people? And we, because we are blessed to live in our country of America. Listen, folks, one of the things that we have that sets us apart from many people around the world is we have an opportunity to express our beliefs every year through voting. And that's a very important thing to do, isn't it? That's our responsibility. And I think that's one of those things. He says, don't owe anyone anything except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. He's saying, look, you got a responsibility. And your responsibility is to love one another. You express that, in the ways that you express that are incredibly important. We do it politically by voting. We also do it ethically in the way that we deal with one another. We do it morally in the way that we love one another. Look at that. He says, don't owe anyone anything. Now be careful. Number one, be careful not to take that out of total context, because I've been part of a church, not ours, but a church that I pastored. And they took that out of context, I believe. And they said, we cannot borrow money in order to build a building. Because if we borrow anything, then we owe someone something. Be careful. Be careful. I don't think that's exactly what it means. However, certainly the Bible teaches us that we should be able to pay our debts. And so I think the way you get around that is you say, if we as a church can pay our debts, and we show how we can do that, and we need to borrow some money, then we can do that. But we should not borrow money because we just got to borrow money. We got to get out of this debt and have no way, no clue, no structure, no understanding of how we're going to pay that debt. Just we're going to trust God. I'm not so sure that's what God ever intended. You need to consider the cost. But at the same time, I don't think he's saying you've got to have all your money in a bank before you do anything. I don't think he's saying that. Again, the Christian life is not one of simplicity, but complexity and trust and wisdom and all of those things tied together. So I don't take this out of context and say, don't owe anyone anything. But I do think he's using it in this context. You do owe people a lot of things. And what is that? It is a debt of love, right? Except to love one another, For the one who loves one another has fulfilled the law. Now look at this, and I think this is really good. That as we love those in government, how do we love them? We love them with respect. Listen, I've lived long enough. There are politicians that have gotten in power that I did not agree with them at all, but they are there. And what are we to do as Christians? Well, I'll tell you, we need to love them with a love that is an indebted love for them. Does that mean they earned our love? See, it's hard to say. If I disagree with them and I see that there's some moral bankruptcy in this, it's easy for me to just say, well, you're wrong, I'm right, therefore I don't need to love you. And that's not, we have got a debt of love. How do you express that? You do that with a qualified love. I want to give you an example from the Old Testament. Jeremiah, chapters 27, 28, 29. Jeremiah is talking to the people of Israel, and he said, God says that Nebuchadnezzar, this is a despotic king, this is a non-believing king, is going to be the one who rules the people of Israel, and God says that he is my servant Nebuchadnezzar. Wow. God's placed him in authority at this moment of history. What should we do? Well, we should respect him. And we should be calm in our look at those in charge of us in our government that we do not respect or we do not agree with, or we respect, but we do not agree with. When there's a calmness. Why is there a calmness? Because God has placed him there, or her. God has placed that person. We can be calm. We don't need to be anxious. We don't need to rub our hands. We also need to be qualified in our love, because we don't have to just say, okay, we'll do whatever you want us to do. No. We can speak out. We can say, this is morally wrong. This is ethically wrong. This is something biblically that's wrong. But we do it in a way that we do it with love. We disagree with love. Now, I think there may be even a qualification to that. And I think back, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, World War II, I mentioned him last week. In the midst of a ruler that was killing people, do we just say, well, we don't need to do anything about that? No, I don't think so. Because there you go beyond what God says to be right. And at that point, we do what we need to do to oppose that kind of regime. And it's difficult. Man, Dietrich Bonhoeffer had a lot of sleepless nights trying to figure out what to do. And I don't know exactly what to do. There is no, okay, here is the rules on how you do that. No. It's not. But we need to do it prayerfully, considerately, respectfully, and as a last ditch kind of thing, we need to oppose it in very strong ways, as Bonhoeffer did. Boy, it's tough. It's not something that happens every day. And I don't see that in our government whatsoever at this point. But do we oppose things? Certainly we should. How do we do it? Respectfully, calmly, and understandably. So we should talk about it. That's how we do it. And it's hard to do, because in our polemical times that we live in, you're either on one side or you're another, and people get angry with you, and that's where we are indebted to love that other person. Why do we have that indebtedness? Because when we do, we fulfill the law. So love replaces the law? No. It fulfills the law. Law tells us how do we love. And he goes on, he says, the commandments of laws: don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, don't covet. And then the other commandment are summed up by the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of love. What we are to do is to love our neighbor as ourselves. How do you love yourself? Well, you may be thoroughly disappointed with what you've done. The choices you've made, the things you've said, the actions you've done. You may be so angry at yourself. But you know what you'll do tonight? You'll sit down for supper. You'll feed your body. You will go to a bed and you'll sleep. You will get up and you'll take a shower and you'll clothe yourself. And the next day you will go on with life. You know why? Because you love yourself. And he's saying, give your neighbor at least that much. You disagree with them, you're angry with them, you don't like what they're doing, all right, but love them anyway. Isn't that what Jesus did? You see, love is a fulfillment of the law. Because the law said, you love your neighbor as yourself. Oh my, that's easy, isn't it? That's easy. Oh yeah, no, it's hard, guys. It's hard. But listen, the Christian life is anything but easy. Isn't it? Do you know what the Christian life led Jesus to? To the cross. Was that easy? And I am crucified with Christ. Wow. How did Paul begin chapter 12? This whole section now of application of all the great doctrine and theology of chapters 1 through 8. How did he begin chapter 12? Beseech you therefore by the mercies of God to present your body what? A living sacrifice. That sounds so nice and so good in church, but when you get out in the political world, when you get out into the dog-eat-dog world, when you get out into the world that people don't really agree with you and they just soon bite your head off, you know what you want to do? You want to bite back. Sure you do. And here Paul says, you don't do that. You have an obligation of love. You are to love as God loved. Well, I went back and I was mentioning about Jeremiah, and Jeremiah says, now wait a second. Here, I've placed this despotic king in a rule. Now, here's what happened when they were captured and they went into Babylon. Israel went into Babylon. Guess what they wanted to do? They wanted to become a ghetto, an enclave, protecting themselves. And here is what, if I can find it. Here's what Jeremiah told them. God tells them through Jeremiah is that they are to participate with this unclean pagan city. They are to work for the prosperity and the peace of the city. They are to, this is chapter 27 and 29. They are to build homes and settle down and invest in the community. They're to marry and have sons and daughters, increase in number. But to keep their identity and to seek peace for the city, to pursue overall harmony and prosperity, and pray to the Lord for the city. Jeremiah is telling them to overcome evil with good and bring love into that city. You hear what he's saying? This is where we are. We are to work for our city, for our government, for our state, and pray for peace and prosperity. Why? Because it's good for us too. See, we love them as we love ourselves. But also, we're to keep our identity. We're not to sell ourselves for a label of who we are. We are to keep that so that we can step back and we can criticize, and we can also say this is good and this is not good. It's easy for us to maintain our identity and say, well, we don't want to participate. No, that's not what he says. It is a both and. And that's why it's difficult, folks. That's why it's easy to say, look, if you're not this, then I don't agree with you and you're not a Christian. Man, I've heard so many people, too many people, they can't be a Christian and think this way. They can't be a Christian and believe that way. Or they can't be a Christian and vote this way. Be careful, folks. Nothing biblical about that. Nothing biblical about that at all. And here you go. I mean, just read this chapter. Read it with good eyes and read it without convictions that are all inbred in your thought already, and see where God leads you. All right, why should we do this? Well, the last part of this is our motivation. Why should we live working for the peace and prosperity of our city, and yet at the same time never losing sight of who we are and giving up our identity? How do we do that, and why should we do that? Well, let's look. Verse 11. Besides this, since you know the time, do you know the time? The season that we live in? It is already the hour for you to wake up from that sleep, because now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. He says, listen, guys, wake up. Now he's writing 2,000 years ago to a group of people that were living in the biggest city of the world, the most pagan place in the entire world. And he says, listen, folks, I want you to know the time. What is the time? The time, the season that we're living in. What is that season? It's the hour is about upon us. What is the hour? The hour of judgment. That's 2,000 years ago. Is the hour of judgment upon us? You bet it is. And he says this, because our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. Do you realize that the hour of judgment is closer now than it was an hour ago, a day ago, a year ago, a lifetime ago, a century ago? It is closer now. Every moment that I speak, the hour is drawing upon us. Are you aware of that? Now, I know many of us like to delve into prophecy and what's going to happen here and there. That's all well and good, but I want you to just recognize the reality of whenever that happens, we're closer every heartbeat. What does that mean? It means we should live not as someone who's slumbering and walking around. The other day, someone called me early in the morning. It was after 6. I hadn't gotten up yet. And it went off, and I've got to tell you, I was in a deep sleep at that moment. And when it went off, it's like, where am I? What's going on? I think my alarm's going off. No, it's phone call, and I was asleep. And it took me several minutes to gain composure and figure out what that person needed. I needed to get on my computer. I needed to look up some things. There was a problem. And that's what Paul's saying. We're slumbering. We're in a deep sleep. And he's saying, it's time to wake up, guys. Judgment is upon us. I like what many theologians say. We're in the already and not yet. We're in the already. Jesus has come. Judgment has been made upon the cross for sin. The judgment upon Satan has already been made. That's the already, but we're not there yet. We're not completely there yet. We're living in that between time. And Paul says, don't sleep. Be aware of it. Our motivation is judgment could happen at any time. You don't want to be like those virgins that did not trim out their lanterns and they were sleeping. Be like the ones who put oil in there and trimmed their lanterns and had them lit. And we're looking for you, Jesus. Our motivation is that Jesus is going to show up at any moment. Praise God. Our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. Verse 12, the night is nearly over, the day is near, so let us discard the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let's not live like the Gentiles, he's saying. Let's not live like the world. Let's not just say, well, whatever goes, but rather let's live a life that has the armor of light upon us. You know, Ephesians, is it 6, I think, 5 or 6, where he talks about the armor of God? He says, put on that armor, breastplate of righteousness, helmet of truth. Put all those things on. Why? Because we're in a battle, guys. Don't wake up out of your bed and say, I got to figure out where I am. No, know where you are, stay where you are, and fight with the armor of light. Now look at this. Let us walk with decency, goodness, righteousness, as in the daytime, and not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual impurity and promiscuity, not in quarreling and jealousy. Now, those first several things that he talks about is kind of easy, right? Let's walk in the daytime, decent, not carousing and drunk, not sexually impure and promiscuous. We all say, amen to that. That's good, not me, and good that. And then he says, in the same breath, not in quarreling and jealousy. Oh, if you had an argument with somebody in the last couple of weeks, have you been jealous of somebody? Has covetousness got a hold of your life? Have you been mad? Have you been angry? Well, he says that's just as bad as carousing, drunkenness, sexual impurity, and promiscuity. You put it right in there. I wish, Paul, you hadn't done that because I was feeling pretty good up to that point. Don't walk in darkness, but have the armor of light. And then he says, put on the Lord Jesus Christ. Oh. He said, it's time you put on the righteous robe that's yours. Don't you know? Put it on. And don't make plans to gratify the desires of the flesh. Let me close this way. Put on Christ. Put off the old man and put on the new man. Paul says in one of his letters. Years ago, 40 some years ago, oh my goodness sakes, I was a young student at the Conservatory of Music. And at that time, one of the things I had to purchase, because I was in a choir and I did recitals that required this, I had to buy a tuxedo. It was my own. I had this beautiful ruffled shirt and this big velvet tie, and it's, oh man, you should have seen me. I was something else. But I didn't put that on all the time. Only on special occasions when I did a recital or the concert choir was going to be performing with a Cincinnati orchestra or something like that. All right? I still remember very fondly putting on that. And when I put it on, it was like all of a sudden I could sing better. I looked like somebody special, you know? In fact, if I went to the music hall where the symphony was playing and we were singing, and I went to the back door where they only let in the participants for the evening, I had my tuxedo on, and they immediately opened the door and said, come on in. Because I looked and was the part. Now, if I had my jeans on and an old t-shirt, they would have said, sorry, you can't come in. But I dressed the part because I was the part. Now, listen. If you are the part, then dress the part. And it's a dress of decency. It's a dress of recognizing who we are in our state, in our government. And the way that we deal with one another is out of an obligation of love. Why? Well, here is this. Not because we're earning God's love, but we're demonstrating God's grace. Because when we have been loved much, we simply also love others much. That's how we do it. We receive grace not just to lavish it upon ourselves, but so this world, this place that we live in, should experience the love of Jesus Christ. And with that, I will close out chapter 13. It's a rough chapter, isn't it? It's a great chapter, but I want to tell you what, living life in the real world takes real people that have a real love and that experience the real love of Jesus Christ and passes on that real love to one another. So, my encouragement to you is do exactly that. All right? Thanks so much for joining in another Wednesday night Bible study. Have a great evening.